I'd like to say, in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge Mohkinstis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. Okay, very briefly about justice for Palestinians. So we're very excited to have people here today from all across our country. For those of you who aren't familiar with JFP Calgary, we are a community-based group formed in the fall of 2009 to support the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign that was called for by Palestinian civil society in 2005. We work to end all Canadian complicity in Israeli apartheid. We oppose all forms of racism, including anti-Muslim and anti-Arab racism and anti-Semitism. And we stand in solidarity with all oppressed groups around the world, and in particular, the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. Okay, it's my absolute pleasure now to introduce Dr. Muhannad Ayyash, our guest speaker for this afternoon. Muhannad Ayyash was born and raised in Silwan al-Quds before immigrating to Canada, where he's now a professor of sociology at Mount Royal University. He's the author of Hermeneutics of Violence in 2019 and has recently finished writing another book, Lordship and Liberation in Palestine, Israel. Dr. Ayyash has published several academic articles on topics such as BDS, political violence, vaccine apartheid, anti-Palestinian racism, and Palestinian decolonial movements in journals such as the European Journal of International Relations, the European Journal of Social Theory, Distinction, and Critical Sociology. He's co-edited 2 books, the most recent with Jeremy Wildman, titled Canada as a Settler Colony on the Question of Palestine, and he's also the author of multiple book chapters and has written opinion pieces for Al Jazeera, The Baffler, Middle East Eye, Mondowise, and The Breach, among others. Muhannad's also working on a book chapter on BDS currently. So without further delay, again, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Dr. Ayyash to present today's topic. Welcome, Muhannad.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Sabah. Thank you to all the organizers, and thank you all for coming here today. You know, what I want to do, well, first of all, by the way, I'm speaking from the homelands of the Mi'kmaq people, which is today called Halifax. So I'm not in Calgary at the moment. I'm on sabbatical. Happy to be joining you all on this webinar. So yeah, what I want to do is basically just a general overview of BDS. What is it? Why is it? Why does it exist, and what is it all about? And then leave a lot of time for questions afterwards, because I think that that's more important to kind of hear what you want to know that I can hopefully help with. So when you think about BDS, as Sabah mentioned, right, like this is a movement that comes out of a Palestinian civil society. It's a whole lot of Palestinian civil society organizations that get together and launch this BDS campaign in 2005. And why does it arise in 2005? Well, this is now in the wake of the Oslo agreements. The Oslo agreements brought with them a whole lot of international organizations that told Palestinians, listen, if you get into dialogue and share your experiences with Israelis, we'll, first of all, fund that. we'll fund your organization if it does that kind of cross-cultural work that engages in dialogues for peace, basically. And that's what you need to do in order to be free. And obviously, it was all a sham. Palestinians did do a lot of these activities and events, and organizations were created and funded by, you know, Western donors largely to do these kinds of dialogue activities with Israelis. And it wasn't going anywhere. These were just exercises that were making the donors feel good that they're advancing peace, quote unquote, it made Israelis feel good because it made them feel like they're trying their best to coexist with the Palestinians. But none of the actual structures of Israeli settler colonialism or apartheid were dismantled. They all not just stayed in place, they started to expand during this period. There was more settlements being built in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. More settlers were moving into those spaces. The right of return of Palestinian refugees who have been expelled from their land since 1948, it was considered a non-starters by the Israelis. It was off the table. It was not even part of the negotiations. The idea of East Jerusalem being a capital of a Palestinian state, they were never serious about that. And it was clear to Palestinian civil society that these exercises in quote unquote peaceful dialogue were just a veneer, a cover for the continued settler colonial expansion of the Israeli state and the continued entrenchment of a system of Israeli apartheid over the lives of Palestinians, whose true aspirations for real liberation and freedom and sovereignty were not at all being met by the Oslo Accords or by these kinds of exercises. So civil society said, well, we're not suckers. We're not going to just like go along with this. So we need a new campaign to defeat this. And this is what BDS, this is how it emerges. It emerges to say that the Israeli state is not serious about Palestinian freedom and liberation. They're not serious about the right of return. They're not serious about Jerusalem. Heck, even if you support a two-state solution, they're not serious about that. And they were right and correct in all of those things. Israel has never been serious about any of those things. The most Israel ever offered was an incomplete sovereignty for Palestinians in 18% of the West Bank. That's it. No right of return, no East Jerusalem, and just 18% of the West Bank would be under a pseudo-sovereignty, not even a real full sovereignty. So these were not serious effects. So BDS says, okay, well, or Palestinian civil society says, okay, only pressure on the Israeli state can move it into a different direction. The path that it's on is very clear. Continued settler colonial expansion, continued entrenchment of a system of apartheid that forbids Palestinians their rights and freedoms. So unless you pressure the state to act differently, it will not act differently. Since it enjoys complete immunity from the international community, namely the United States and Western countries that have enormous power, imperial power in the region and beyond. Since it enjoys impunity with the support of the US and other imperial nations that are part of the American imperial bloc, it will not change. It has no reason to. It just goes, well, I'm not facing any negative consequences really from continued the settler colonial project. So continue the settler colonial project. So the BDS is created to raise the costs, to make the Israeli state go, okay, there is a cost to pay for our denial of Palestinian rights and freedoms, and therefore that price becomes too high to pay. Israeli state will then sit down at the negotiation table and actually get into a real negotiation for real settlements, peaceful settlements. Now, BDS does not take an official position on whether it's a one-state solution or a two-state solution. Its founder and leader, Omar Barghouti, is very clear. His personal preference is a one-state solution, but they very deliberately decided to stay out of that. And they just said, regardless of which path you follow, it has to meet the aspirations of the Palestinian people for freedom and liberation. So if you are, for example, a proponent of the two-state solution, it can't be the Oslo Accords version of it, because that's not a real solution, or a two-state for that matter. It's just one state with control over self-administrative authority over just 18% of the West Bank. That's not a two-state solution. But if you are for a two-state solution that just imagines like a real Palestinian state with a connection between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, full Palestinian sovereignty over the entirety of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem as its capital, full right of return for Palestinian refugees to all the lands from the river to the sea. That would be, meeting the aspirations to some extent of the Palestinian people. So BDS does not take a position against that, for example, right? And that's done so that they also avoid that way losing support, right? Like, because there are, big segments of the Palestinian population in Palestine that supports the two-state solution of the kind that I just described. So they don't want to alienate those by saying we're just a one-state solution proponents, right? So it doesn't take a position on that, but it says whatever the solution is, it has to have real sovereignty, real freedom for all Palestinians. And that can only come about if you pressure the Israeli state, because if it doesn't have a price to pay, it will not, in fact, engage in such negotiations. So that's when they start the BDS campaign. And the whole idea of it is to create economic and political pressure on the Israeli state. So if you manage to cut off all political and economic ties that the Israeli state enjoys with the world, they will come to the negotiating table. Like they can't live, they can't survive without that, right? Like, so it's really quite that simple. Now, how do you go about doing that? BDS becomes a very kind of decentralized campaign, meaning that there's a central organizing core in Palestine, but it's not gonna like open up chapters everywhere where like people from that core organizing group comes in to take over those chapters. They'll just say, well, okay, we have two basic rules that you can't break. And if you subscribe to those, or really actually it's three basic rules that you have to subscribe to. And if you subscribe to those, we give you tactical and strategic flexibility to advance BDS in your own context, however that works in your context. So why are, they're not going to give directives to BDS in Geneva, and they're going to look the exact same as BDS in Calgary. Two different contexts. What might work here might not work there, vice versa. So they leave a lot. That's what makes it decentralized. They leave a lot of tactical and strategic flexibility for people in different areas to carry out the BDS campaign. Now, the three things that you have no choice, you have to agree to them, and every movement has to do this. This is wise activism, to create, you don't want too many, but certain rules that you say, yeah, you have to agree to those to say that you're part of our campaign. And they're not open for debate. So number one is it's about the rights of all Palestinians. You can't forget about the rights of the Palestinian refugees from 1948 onwards. So the inalienable right of Palestinians to return is a must. You have to actually agree to that in order to be a participant in BDS. Number two, this is not about cosmetic reforms of the Israeli state. This is not just about taking down the Netanyahu government and replacing it with a Gantz government. That does nothing. So this is about challenging the structural foundation of the Israeli state as a settler colonial state and that practices apartheid. That is what needs to be transformed in order for BDS to actually do what it's supposed to do, which is speak to the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Number three, it's a non-violent movement. They're very clear about that, and that's important to them for a variety of reasons, some moral, some strategic. Morally, it subscribes to the vision of a Gandhian type of resistance. And we're talking about the real Gandhi, not the Disneyland version of Gandhi that is popular in Canada and the US. It views nonviolence as an important vehicle towards the creation of an alternative world, and that it's a good in and of itself. And as well, it has strategic value in the sense that nonviolence allows you to gather more people into your activism, as opposed to armed violence, which necessarily usually has to go underground and be very selective in who gets to participate. And it's usually, a specific age group, tends to be younger. It tends to be more males than females, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very much restricts your the people that participate in your movement. And of course, critically, it allows them to not be outlawed by the Israeli authorities. Their ability to continue to operate in Palestine is precisely predicated on their ability to avoid being labeled a terrorist organization in Israel. So that's why they make it a huge point to avoid any connection with violence or armed resistance. So that's kind of the basic structure of it. And like I said, the whole point is to create economic and political and cultural pressure on Israel. So it involves a boycott of everything. We're talking about economics. So, asking countries and companies to divest from investments in Israel or in Israeli companies. And it doesn't matter here about settlements or Tel Aviv. You need to create pressure on all Israeli institutions, not just the settlements. They're all complicit in the same and actively part of the same settler colonial project and system of apartheid. So cutting all economic ties with the Israeli state, so that's divestment. Sanctions, encouraging your own government to place sanctions on the Israeli state so that it becomes harder for companies to do business with them, to invest in Israeli markets and projects and so on. And boycotts, so not buying any goods or services that are sold by Israeli companies and corporations. So it's a complete economic boycott. And you want to boycott Israeli companies as well as companies in other parts of the world that are complicit in apartheid. So like Puma, Starbucks, the list is on the BDS website, which will be shared at some point. But you can Google all that stuff yourself. It's pretty easily searchable. So that's kind of the economic part. And then doing your own on the individual level. So if you see a made in Israel, you don't buy it. Simple as that. And then pushing your governments and institutions to divest from and sanction Israeli companies and institutions. It also involved cultural and academic boycotts. So calling on, for example, universities to sever their agreements or their ties and end their agreements with Israeli universities that are themselves actively complicit and actively participating for some in colonization and in apartheid. Cultural boycotts, whether it's preventing Israeli groups from participating in Eurovision or musicians going from here or the US to go perform in Israel, preventing those things from happening. And that also includes sports, asking for banning the Israeli sports teams from participating in international tournaments and games and so on. Also, like so it always operates on like the individual level and a larger state and institutional level. So for like individual level, for example, in academia, the academic boycott. If I'm invited to speak on a panel that is organized by an Israeli university, I should say no. I won't participate on that panel. Any kind of conference or academic event that is sponsored by or organized by an Israeli institution, there's a call to boycott it. Asking academic institutions like the American Anthropology Association just did last summer to adopt BDS and officially cut ties with Israeli institutions, the Israeli Anthropology Association, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, individual academics can still go to the American Anthropology Association and present. That doesn't stop that, but no official institutional ties. And basically avoid participating in any kind of academic or cultural event that normalizes the Israeli state and normalizes its apartheid system and settler colonial nature. So any event that does that, so that's basically, because there's a lot of gray areas, of course, that people come up across when we're talking about these things. So the one thing that you continuously ask yourself when it comes to academic and cultural boycott is, will this event normalize the Israeli state? Will they be using that event to say, see, we're not racist. We let a Palestinian on this panel to come and say whatever they wanted to say. So that's how they use it, right? Like, so to say we're not racist. So that's why there's a boycott against those events, so that they are not able to use it in that manner. So kind of that's the golden rule when it comes to cultural and academic boycotts is it going to help them normalize Israel and say that it's not an apartheid state, it's not a settler colonial state, and so on. Yeah, so that's kind of, the hope is that for all that economic, political, and cultural, and including in cultural as academic as well, pressure to build momentum and to expand in such a way where it becomes impossible for Israel to carry on business as usual. When that happens, they'll be forced to come to a real negotiation position, and then that can lead us to a place where Palestinians can enjoy their freedom and sovereignty. In Canada, of course, and I'll end on this. In Canada, of course, the Canadian government has responded in a very hostile way to BDS, as has, of course, the US, UK, etc. All these states, of course, are not neutral states. They're very much part of the imperial alliance that views Israel as a critical component of it. And so they will, of course, try to defeat any such campaigns like BDS. And they have done that through laws. This happens more in the UK and the US, but it's on its way here as well. Usually that's how it works. The US and the UK lead the way, and then Canada follows along. But there's a lot of anti-BDS legislation in the US, in the UK, that makes it basically illegal to adopt BDS. And of course, a lot of these court cases are ongoing. I'm not a legal expert, so I can't speak to those kinds of dynamics and what it looks like on the ground. But different states have different rules around this. But it's already a serious obstacle that a lot of activists have to put up with. In Canada, there's of course been the condemnation. Trudeau condemned anyone who adopts BDS. There was no legal backing to that condemnation, but it's obviously a way for the Canadian state to say, you're not part of human rights and civilization and democracy if you adopt BDS. The Canadian government is telling you that when it's condemning you for adopting BDS. So, the response to that from our position, of course, is to put pressure on politicians. If they want to condemn us, let's condemn them back. We put pressure on them by voting them out of office. We don't have many good options of who you bring in that will support BDS. But the idea is, if you do, let's say, forget the Conservative Party, that's a lost cause. But if you start to go to the NDP and saying, I don't care, lose to the Liberals this time around, because you're not adopting BDS. Right? And you won't get my vote ever until you get me BDS. Or go to the Liberals and say, I don't care, lose to Conservatives, and you'll continue to lose until you change your position on that. I mean, I don't see any other way but that kind of pressure to force the Canadian government to change its position. And it's an uphill battle, and I understand that, and it's a long-term battle. But you do what you can, you try to move it ahead and move it forward as much as possible. We have seen some movement forward on this. The NDP now does openly say we're for a weapons embargo on Israel. That's not enough, but it's a step in the right direction. That wasn't easy. It was a lot of organizing behind the scenes to make that happen. But that needs to be not like the final step, but it should be viewed as the first step towards more organizing, more grassroots pressure on politicians to force them to take these positions. And I know one of the things that people struggle with, excuse me, or actually, I think that was already a question, so maybe I won't talk about that. But yeah, so we have to continue to be vigilant about this. We have to keep making sure that our politicians hear from us about the importance of BDS, completely rejecting any ridiculous notion that it's anti-Semitic. Because it's not, and telling politicians that you don't want to waste your time having those dishonest conversations, that you want to have honest conversations about the plight of the Palestinian people and the need for BDS, because that is the only way to put pressure on a state that is committing genocide against the Palestinian people at this moment. So I would speak bluntly, openly, proudly, and aggressively to politicians on these issues. Not rudely, because that never goes anywhere, but just be assertive, and continue to be pushing it without being apologetic and falling into the trap of defending yourself against anti-Semitism the whole discussion, because that's what the Zionist lobby wants. So yeah, so this is kind of a part of what I wanted to talk about, and now I want to leave a half hour for Q&A. So, and I think we already have questions.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Ayyash. That was very informative, very motivating. So thank you for that. So we have our first question, Dr. Ayyash. What about the fact that, quote, cultural boycotts would be considered as a hate crime or anti-Semitic?
So there's no legislation that I know of right now that would say that. If you're referring to the Indigo case, where some people are being charged with a hate crime, I mean, those are. I'll be shocked if those stick. And I think the lawyers are saying that they'll be shocked if those stick. But those were only, I think they would not have been able to bring those forward without I can't remember the name of the other charge. For painting on the store, whatever that charge was. So if you're not doing that, then I don't think you have to worry about, if you're just saying, I'm not going to buy anything at Indigo, nobody's going to be able to charge you with a hate crime. You're fine doing that. If you're taking more disruptive action, it doesn't hurt to, well, first of all, work with others, and it doesn't hurt to speak to lawyers that are part of an activist group, right? Like, so about how to do that in such a way where you don't invite these kinds of charges and that sort of thing, and you protect yourself, because yeah, lawfare is a big thing, unfortunately. And by the way, this has become a thing in social movements across the board. More and more movements are asking, once they have their organizations up and running, they're like, okay, so anyone here a lawyer or know a lawyer that we can talk to about this or that action, and how we can do it in such a way where we don't make it easy on the state to clamp down on us. And of course, sometimes, as happened in Calgary to Sam, they can still do that over trumped up charges that come out of nowhere without warning. So that is always a possibility, because the state does want to shut you down. There's no doubt about that. But you individually say, like, tweeting out, like, I'm never going to buy anything at Indigo because of its support for Israel. Like, nobody's going to just like charge you with a hate crime for that. So you're good.
Great. Moving on to the next question. With a long list of things to boycott, how do I choose targeted boycott? Or sorry, specific target?
Yeah, that's a very common question. And yes, it can be quite a long list, and it can be difficult for people to figure out what to focus on. But what you do is you kind of try to stay in the know and see what people are focusing on and participate in that. So I understand sometimes it's difficult to do all the boycotts. I think my mom complains mostly about Kit Kat being on the list, and she's like, "But I like my Kit Kat. Can I skip that one?" So everybody has that one thing that they're like, "Oh," you know. But yeah, I mean, I'm not aware. I don't know. I told my mom, was like, "Well, it's not good for your health anyway, so you should just not eat Kit Kat." But if she buys one the odd time or here and again, it's not the end of the world. But like right now, at this moment, there's a lot of focus on Starbucks and McDonald's. So I would encourage you to focus on those. Definitely don't participate in those. Let those losses pile up. Sometimes when we're talking about a grassroots campaign like this, Palestinians don't have a lot of resources. So when you're talking about a grassroots campaign, sometimes focusing on just a small number of targets that then suffer a lot of losses will be enough to send a message to the others. Because then the others go, well, okay, they don't have the capability to boycott everything at the same time. But if they're doing this to Starbucks now, what's to say they won't focus on me at some other point, and then I'm suffering Starbucks' losses? I can't have that happen. Maybe I should change my behavior. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. So try your best to kind of follow on social media or in your conversations with friends what's being the big target right now, and choose those as your specific targets.
Here's another one. This is a great question. I'm from a small community. How can I participate in BDS while protecting the local economy? For example, the Starbucks is a franchise owned by a local business owner.
Right. So this also is a common question. Look, boycotts are meant to be disruptive. Disruptive means some people are going to lose money. It's just the way it is. But what's the option? To just continue with genocide? It's not an option. So I hear this a lot from especially actually the Arab world right now, where Starbucks is taking a real hit. Because some people are saying, but the people losing their businesses are the Arab owners of those franchises. Yes, but it's Starbucks, ultimately, that's the target, and they're losing a lot more, and that's what needs to happen at the moment. So my hope is that those people will open up their own coffee shop. I'm sure they've picked up a lot of tricks of the trade as they're working that franchise. And I understand that the marketing piece will be the most difficult one for them to do when you move from a franchise ownership to your own thing. But that's how you support local communities, is to say, if they do go out of business, is to encourage them to start their own coffee shop, that you will then go out of your way. That's also supporting BDS, by the way, is not just to boycott, but to put money towards the replacements of the things that we're going to boycott. I don't know about you, but I'm like, I want to know what's made in South Africa and buy it, right? Like, so it works that way too. Let's also reward those who don't enable Israeli genocide and in fact work against it. So that would be my answer to that. But I understand there will be difficult choices like that, especially in small communities.
Okay, just a quick note, folks. I've enabled the chat here so people can pop some comments in there and contribute to the conversation, and you're welcome to do so. Just please be aware that questions in Slido will be prioritized. So if you have particular questions for Dr. Ayyash, continue to use the Slido link, which I've shared multiple times. But if you do have comments, because I'm receiving quite a few, do feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, moving on. Which banks or credit unions are okay to support? Is there a way to have ethical mutual funds right now?
I don't know.
Oh, sorry. We'll go back to the next one afterwards. So
Sure, that's a tough one. I don't know. Is there such a thing as a mutual funds ethical account? I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that. Again, I would just go on what is being targeted right now, which, as far as I can see, TD Bank is kind of, or sorry, Scotiabank. Correct? Scotiabank is. I always mix those up. I think it's Scotiabank, not TD Bank. I'm pretty sure it's Scotiabank, right? Anybody else know? But anyway, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Scotiabank that's being targeted more. So that would be how you try to focus it, even though there are no good choices, alternative choices. Okay, someone did write it as Scotiabank. Okay, good. So that would be how I would approach that one. Unfortunately, I don't have very good answers on that, and I don't know that there exists any. But yeah, I mean, try to. Try to find as much information as you can from Googling this and that sort of thing. But yeah, when in doubt, join what is being targeted and focus our efforts on that one institution, which again is going to hopefully then send a message to other institutions. That's kind of the whole strategy behind focusing on specific institutions, even though you can easily say, well, that one is just as bad, but you have to kind of do that to funnel in our limited resources for hopefully more success.
Great. Moving on to the next one. Sorry, and we'd missed this one. I missed this one earlier. Since the beginning of the BDS movement, what focus has been most effective or seen greatest results? And what do you think is the best strategy now in our area?
So, I'm not very good at remembering these types of specific details. So if you just go to the BDS movement website, they have a tab that is easily searchable for our victories, and they list some of their greatest results there. Just recently, Puma, that was a big result. That was years and years and years and years of campaigning. And you know what? I know some activists are upset when they say, and I agree with them, when they say Puma didn't come out and said, we're stopping it because of BDS. But you know what? Yeah, that's frustrating, and it would actually have more effect if they say that. But at the same time, who's our message to? Our message is to other companies, and the other companies know exactly what's going on, and that to me matters more. Because ultimately, again, we want other companies to go, this is not worth it. That's what we want them to do. When companies don't care about morality, they don't care about people, they just care about profits. And we want them to know that there's a bottom line argument here, that they will lose money. And because they don't want to lose money, they don't want to support Israel. So there have been successes in a number of areas. But yeah, Puma is a good example of a recent one. Yeah.
Great. How do I talk to others about BDS?
Another common question that is very excellent question. So my biggest advice on this is don't be defensive about it. Don't start by saying, okay, BDS is not anti-Semitic. No, start by presenting it on its own grounds. It's about the liberation and rights of the Palestinian people, that those rights have been denied them for over 100 years, at least 75, of course, since the creation of the Israeli state. If you're more comfortable going with 75, go with 75. Because you don't know enough about what happened before, which not many people do, right? So just go with 75. And just say, what else are they supposed to do to get their rights? They are asking for pressure on the Israeli state so that it comes to the negotiating table in good faith. It's simple as that. If you do, and I would put it in blunt terms as well. If you don't support BDS, then you are supporting the status quo. You are supporting the genocide of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. You are supporting the systems of apartheid. You are supporting the settlements. There's no gray area here. I would put it in confident, proactive ways. And if they bring up the whole anti-Semitism thing, then you say it's not. And many Jewish communities and organizations support it because it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It has to do with pressuring a foreign nation state to stop forbidding the Palestinian people from reaching their aspirations for freedom and rights.
Next question. Isn't it more impactful if we submit complaints to companies that we're boycotting or planning on boycotting than just leaving them with no explanation?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so I'm not sure if you're thinking about this like as an individual level or as a group level, right? It's very clear, for example, that the boycott of Starbucks and McDonald's is precisely because of their support for Israel. Now, not every individual now needs to go to McDonald's and send them a message. Although actually, I do like that idea of sending a message. It's just you don't need to do that. Every day that you might have gone to lunch, you don't need to go. It might have gone to McDonald's for lunch, which you shouldn't anyway because it's bad for your health. You don't need to send them a message saying, "I'm not coming today because of your support for Israel." If you do, go for it. But it's very clear to those companies why they are being boycotted. Absolutely. And that should be made clear. So yeah, I mean, if you want to do that on an individual level, go for it. But it's already kind of clear because that's the public message that I think is very clear as to why they're seeing their bottom line drop. And you see people, I don't know these. This is where my specifics are not great. But there was a viral video of a young actor on some famous TV show that was coming out and talking about like, oh, I never meant what I said about Israel and the Palestinian people, and I'm sorry, and all of that. And yeah, people are responding to his Instagram whatever video. Yeah, Stranger Things. That's it. You all know this stuff better than I do, so thank you. Yeah, that's the guy. And people are just like, yeah, no, nice try, bud. And people are doing that to McDonald's too, by the way. McDonald's released a statement, I think, a couple of days ago, and people was like, yeah, no. We know exactly what you're doing. So these companies know. Yeah, so that message is getting out there, and yes, it is important.
Okay, next question is, are there local targets unique to so-called Calgary, Alberta, and/or Canada that I should be targeting?
So I'm not aware of anything like specific to Calgary or Alberta or Canada that is not also part of the larger BDS call. So like Starbucks and McDonald's, like that's global, right? Like and Puma was, and Puma's still on the list, I believe. But anyway, so I mean, if you go to the list that the BDS movement releases, a lot of those companies are here in Canada too. So, but there are of course like things that are specific to Canada, like I said with Scotiabank, right? Like, so that's not on the BDS international one, but it's on the BDS Canada one. So you kind of, again, you try to keep up with that information based on keeping up with social media and what people are saying. And of course, there was in Calgary, Justice for Palestinians organized a BDS campaign when the city was doing this contract with. Oh, I'm forgetting the name of the companies. I need this stuff written in front of me to remember it. Saba, you know what I'm talking about here. Can you help me out? The city, the
Company Lockheed Martin, or are we talking about the C train?
The C train.
Yes, the Green Line.
The Green Line. What
yes.
was the company's name again?
We call it CAF because it's a very difficult name to pronounce of a Spanish company. But what I'll do, Muhannad, is I will put the link in the chat to our website all about that campaign.
Great, yeah. So keep up with Justice for Palestinians for Calgary specific stuff, and that's an example of it right there.
Okay, moving on. Any guidance? Oh, this is a great question. Any guidance for if you are given gift cards for certain boycotted retailers? Is it better to use or donate them since the company has already profited from it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Is there a possibility to return gift cards? I've never thought about that, but if that's possible, I would return it. And if it was a gift, I would go back to the person who gifted to you and say, "Can you please return this?" And because use it as an opportunity to educate them about BDS. If there's no option to return, donate it yourself to someone in need, hopefully. That can use it, or if you are yourself in need of something that you really need from that gift card, like I said, it's okay, to spend $20 on something that is essential for you to survive, that you can use, and say, okay, but use it still as an educational opportunity for whoever gave you that gift card to let them know about BDS. I know these kinds of conversations are happening more. People who are receiving, I've not heard of the gift card one, but like or even like, yeah, partners, one of the partners comes home with like dates that are on the boycott list, and their partner's like, yeah, no, not in this house, those got to go back, I hope you got the receipt, and if you haven't got the receipt, those are not being consumed. Like so these, use it as an opportunity to start conversations if you're unable to return it altogether. Yeah.
Okay, any books or resources you can suggest to learn more?
Yeah, and the book that Omar Barghouti wrote on BDS is a very good one. I can try. Is it possible for me to try to find that link right now? Here, let me just try that right now as I speak. But that's a very good one in terms of books. He explains it very well there, resources. Again, the BDS movement website itself. The Justice for Palestine, for Palestinians, for more kind of local Calgary specific things. There's also, of course, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, CJPME. Their website has some good resources for BDS that you can go and visit. There's also the Canadian Coalition of BDS, I believe. They have some good resources. So yeah, those are good online resources. But in terms of books, I would highly recommend Omar Barghouti's book. I'm just trying to find it as I'm speaking here. There it is. It was published in 2011. Am I able to put it in the chat box myself?
Yeah, you should be able to. It's been enabled. I'm just plopping a link in as well here. And I can spell the name as well.
Okay, well, mine is not a link. It's just the full citation. So if you put that in a Google search, you should be able to find it. Yeah.
Great. Next question is how, and this, this will be our final question, folks, so we can give people an opportunity to make any closing comments to Dr. Ayyash before we wrap up. How do we tackle governments trying to silence us? In the past, Trudeau government has come out and made statements against it.
Yeah, so like I said, it was the Trudeau government that condemned us for condemned anybody for following BDS. So we respond to that with pressure and telling them, that you don't accept their position on this, that you're actually ashamed of the Canadian government's position on this, and that they will not get your votes. So I would take a sort of what's the word that I'm looking for here? An offensive approach to this, not a defensive approach, and call them out and tell them that their position on Palestine in general and on BDS is reprehensible, and that they will not have your support as long as they maintain those positions. And same with the NDP. Make sure that they still know that they need to do more. If I may just very quickly, because I know you said the last question, but the next one I like, so might very quickly address that one too. Would you consider academic and social events for pro-Israel as a form of propaganda? Yes, 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 and I would not participate in any such event. Because it is, again, if the event normalizes Israel as a liberal democracy that respects human rights and cares for the Palestinian people and is not racist and is not settler colonial and is not apartheid, if it does that, it is an event that is marked for boycott. So I would not speak at any such event. Yes.